Oh, movie buff specialist Phil and John are back with episode number 15 in our series, counting down our favorite 100 movies of all time. We are on number 86. That's right. We've done 15 episodes, 15 straight weeks. So many people set out to start this type of podcast. And how many of them actually get this far? None of you thought we would do it. So you're welcome, everybody. Episode number 15, number 86. Tonight, we're going to be talking about David Fincher's The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, and we're going to be talking about La La Land, which is in replacement of my number 86, which is Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which is higher on John's list, so we'll be talking about at a different time. John, welcome. How's it feel to be back? Talking about two movies, one that's a musical that's kind of depressing, and one that has a lot of depressing in it for completely different reasons.
I feel great being back, and I like the fact that we're going to be talking about music with two of these movies today, because let me tell you, music plays a big part in why The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo is on my list at all.
Yep. Yeah. And I got to say, man, I watched Fincher's, and I've seen both of them numerous times, and I sat down and I watched the original. I got to tell you, after watching it, the music might be the only thing that's better in the Fincher's one. But hey,
yep.
It's your number 86, so there'll be plenty of defending here. And I know that you had a take on La La Land where I'm going to have to be doing a lot of defending. Mm-hmm. But I just wanted to throw that in right off the top so we know where this conversation is going to be heading.
Absolutely. This will be two really fun movies to talk about, despite the fact that The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo is not a fun movie.
No, not in the slightest bit. Let's start with La La Land, though, since it's not actually on my list. And I feel like that means we should start with that and save the real movie for the end here. So I went with La La Land. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is my number 86. We'll be talking about that a lot more when John has it come up on his list, which I think, where do you know where you have it, John, out of curiosity?
Off the top of my head, but I don't think it's that much further along.
It's not that much further. Oh, there it is. So it looks like it's our 64th episode. So 50 spots higher than where we have it right here. So in the 30s. Yeah, he was wrong about that. In the 30s somewhere. But I went with La La Land as the replacement for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood because I feel like both movies are very critical of Hollywood, or very reminiscent of what Hollywood could have been, should have been, and is always acted like it was, even though it never really was. And so I went with La La Land because even though one is a musical and the other is a Quentin Tarantino, epic, the two movies have very similar themes in them. And La La Land to me is one of the most biting criticisms of Los Angeles, and it's totally masquerading as a fun musical with, like, look at all the glitz and glamour. But in reality, Damien Chazelle hates everything about Hollywood, and you can tell from every single line of dialogue in this movie. So that's why I went La La Land. But John, your first time seeing La La Land, I'm ready. I got my dukes up. I'm ready to go. Okay. What do you got for me?
So, yeah, it was my first time going in. Obviously, I knew this movie was incredibly popular when it was released. There was the whole La La Land Moonlight fiasco at the Oscars a few years ago. And I didn't really know what to expect. I knew that it was a musical, and I kind of had an idea of the premise of it. So I went in, and first things first, there's this traffic jam, and everyone starts breaking out into song and dance. Mm-hmm. Okay, feels pretty typical proto-musical here. But your main characters aren't in the opening number. That's really weird. That's kind of what opening numbers are for, is to introduce you to the characters that matter in your musical. And we don't actually see them until after that number is done. As soon as that number ends, yeah, we're into our two protagonists. But they're just nowhere. That opening number. So that was kind of weird.
There you go. I lost you for a second there. I lost you. You said
watching along for a little
bit. They
were
nowhere, but then what did you say about that?
Oh, just that, like, as soon as that opening number ended, then all of a sudden, there they were. Mm-hmm. And then the focus is just on the protagonist at that point. And then I still didn't really know how to expect going forward. Of course, there are a couple of musical numbers. I thought it was really weird that there was licensed music in this musical as well. Kind of threw me off a little bit. And then the musical numbers kind of just stop. And
okay. There's John's take. So now here's where I go with this. I believe that Damien Chazelle's goal was to try to modernize the musical as much as possible. The truth is, John, and this is not actually on my list. I gave it 4 stars, pretty much signaling it doesn't have a chance to ever be on my top 100 list. Maybe in 10 years I'll watch it again and feel differently, but I still give it 4 stars, but I don't give it that 4.5 that says, hey, I might bump this into my top 100 at some point. But I think what it comes down to is the days of West Side Story and Sound of Music, Oliver, My Fair Lady, Guys and Dolls, those days are over. They really are. And we see this year Hamilton came out and filled a pretty big void for people. But I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that it was literally just a stage representation of what took place on the stage, and people weren't able to go to Broadway. Disney movies, that type of musical is always going to have a place. But in terms of adult musicals, I don't think they really have a place right now in film. I think people are struggling on where do these fit in. And when was the last time before La La Land that a really serious adult musical did well? Was it Chicago? Les Mis was in there, but then Les Mis was in there. So go ahead.
Chicago definitely would have been the most successful.
Mm-hmm. So you have Chicago, Les Mis, La La Land, and again, La La Land not based on anything, which I thought was interesting, because a lot of times now making a musical is very risky because it's based on something. Even 9 coming out was somehow based on 8.5. When that one came out, the Rob Marshall movie with Daniel Day-Lewis, that was somehow based on 8.5 in some weird way, and that's why they called it 9. But so pretty much those movies, they're always based on something. And then this one right now is brand new. And I thought that what was interesting is if you listen to all of the dialogue in this movie is about how everybody thinks of Hollywood as heyday Hollywood and how that is just total bullshit and it doesn't exist. And how John Legend's character comes in and says to Ryan Gosling, you're the reason jazz is dying because you're not modernizing. You're not making it more relevant. And I think the other reason why Hollywood and movies in Hollywood, it's not as good or blah, 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 or why you're starting to see certain movies that people aren't taking to the way that they might have taken to a Lord of the Rings or something 20 years ago is almost because they're stuck in their way. And how do you break out of that way? And so I give Chazelle a lot of credit for this movie for trying to make it as unique and as in line with what a modern audience would want to watch, but still make it with, if you just throw this record on, whatever you want to say about the musicals, you can say, but Another Day of Sun will get stuck in your head. And the beat to City of Stars will get stuck in your head. And Audition will get stuck in, those are all songs that will definitely get stuck in your head, but he's trying to do it in a way that is more for this new audience that really doesn't like to sit down and watch musicals anymore unless they're actually going to a theater. So that's where I come from with it, but I totally understand what you're saying. Other than Another Day of Sun, there is no big number. I guess Audition is a big number, but other than Another Day of Sun, there's no big showstopper in the movie. And even that scene is really just thrown on to say, yes, I am making a musical, although it moves away from that as the movie progresses.
Mm-hmm. And for me, the big thing was it felt like the musical side of it just took away from everything else. Because I think at its core, La La Land is a very beautiful movie. It's colorful, it's great, and I think the themes that it presents, like critique of Hollywood, the idea of modernization versus traditionalism, and the representation of relationships in the film is fantastic. But then there are just these songs in there for some reason.
Yeah, and I think that the songs and such, what it's trying to do is it's trying to offset the absolute darkness of Hollywood with this facade of everything is a song and dance and everything is great. Yeah. And I think even if you listen to the lyrics of the songs, almost none of them are happy. There's not one line. Everything is very cynical. Everything is very much about how maybe someone in the crowd will make you famous, but now I can't even go to bed tonight. I have to get up and drink, even though I don't want to, with my other friends who are just as desperate as I am. Maybe if I just sit in this traffic and keep getting coffee and I'm the one who drove across country, I'll be somebody who becomes famous one day. Everything is very, very cynical towards Hollywood. And I think if you don't notice it, if you're not really familiar with the Hollywood thing, or if you do kind of, you could mistake this movie for being positive, and it 100% is not. And I think that's because of these musical numbers that are thrown in, almost like a way of saying, oh no, they're still having this great time and all of that. Because every time I would get on the phone when I lived out there in LA and call somebody, I tried to make it seem like I was having a good time. But in reality, I hated almost every single second of living out there. Like, it was, in terms of job and all of that stuff, it was just awful. It's terrible. It's soul sucking. Everybody's a horrible person. It's just really bad. And so I think that the musical numbers are meant to kind of draw your attention away from it and be like, these two people are acting like everything is so great and everything. But if you listen to what they're saying, it's really not that great.
Yeah. And I think a lot of that confusion also comes from the fact that both our main characters get the dream that they were after in the end too. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I think that can definitely leave the audience thinking that this is a happy story, despite the fact that you're not seeing, the two characters together in the end or anything like that. But Sebastian gets his club, and Mia's this very successful actor. Mm-hmm. So it does have this kind of confusing atmosphere to it when it comes to the themes. But if you look and you know where to look, you can definitely see this is not a very positive movie at all.
No, and really what this movie's about, and so when this movie came out, it was before I actually worked at Warner Brothers. I was still working at a smaller company, and what I noticed was people in LA who are from LA absolutely hated this movie. They absolutely hated it. And I think one of the big reasons why is because it tells you that you either choose the dream out there or you choose the relationship. You can't have both. Mm-hmm. And I think that really irked people out there who had grown up in it, because, you want to assume your parents are happy and everybody's happy and all of that. But I think the truth is a lot of people in their 20s who are trying to make it in Hollywood are going through that same struggle of, can I actually have both? And think about how many people actually end up with both. There's not many. I mean, even Brangelina ended up getting divorced. Like, everybody, there's so many divorces and there's so many things, because as we see in this movie, and I think Chazelle does a really good job of painting it, is Ryan Gosling's got to follow his thing, which is being on the road. And Emma Stone's got to follow her thing, which is probably also going to be on the road. When she finds out that the shoot is going to be in Paris and it's going to be 7 months or whatever it is, like, their lives just don't intersect. And what you do start to notice when you live out there is a lot of times the relationships that are the best and that work out there are ones where one person works in the film industry and the other person doesn't, because it's not as conflicting in that way. Then there's a little bit of removal from it. And even though Ryan Gosling here is going after music and film, I kind of put hand in hand, because at the end of the day, you're chasing an entertainment career that is not going to lead to a very normal life. And so, I just noticed that a lot of people who were from LA really hated this movie, and I felt like it was a spot on depiction of what it's really like out there. I thought it was absolutely 100% spot on.
And I even think this theme of the relationship versus dream reality of it is actually something that far extends beyond Hollywood itself too. And it's actually something that can really lead to this type of movie is important to have people realize that, you do have to kind of think about these things, because so many times in popular media, you're shown this perfect couple who get along with each other and do have like these conflicting dreams, but somehow they make it work. So it's really important to have representation in the media that shows that that's not necessarily true. Does it mean you're not going to be happy? No, not necessarily. But does it mean that you're not going to have this idealized life that you thought as a child? Yeah, very much so.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes the ending of this movie so brutal. And I will say that I would probably say the whole movie leading up to the end is like a 3.5 star movie. And then for me, the ending always just puts it over the top. It just puts it over the top. When they sit down, and I have chills, man. I literally have chills. When they sit down and the City of Stars theme starts playing, while they watch the home videos of their child they're never going to have, every time it absolutely just hits me. Because at the end of the day, people who go after this type of career, actors, writers, directors, musicians, comedians, anything like that, you always think when you meet somebody, okay, it's going to go here. It's going to go here. We're going to have this lifestyle, the rich and the famous, and we're going to be able to settle down. We're going to have this perfect life in Beverly Hills. We're going to have this perfect life in Santa Monica. We're going to have this perfect life in Manhattan Beach. We're going to have this perfect freaking life. And you think about that, and it very rarely happens. I mean, really, at the end of the day, everybody you date, unless you marry them, you break up with. It always ends badly unless you marry them or you get into whatever relationship you want to be in that extends until the day you die. Otherwise, it's going to end badly. And this movie does a really good job of capturing that hopefulness of why can't you come with me to Idaho? You can't come with me to Idaho. Seriously? Why? Why can't you come with me? And she has to explain, well, I'm doing this in 2 weeks. Can't you rehearse anywhere? Well, no. Because, yeah, if it wasn't important to me, I could go rehearse in a Motel 6 in Boise. But this is so important to me. This is my life. I need to do this here. And it's those sacrifices that everybody has to make and all of that. But still that vision of, we could have run away together. That could have been me sitting next to you in this club with somebody else owning the club. And would we have been happy in that situation? And I think what this movie does a good job, though, of is even though it's bittersweet and they do get their goal, it does also say that had they chosen the other thing, they probably would have still been happy. And I think that gets lost in the sadness of the ending because it doesn't feel like a happy ending. But it does kind of signal that had they stuck together, they probably would have been okay, too.
Mm-hmm. But I think even in the end, when there's that longing look between the two of them, it still signifies that they're both very content with the lives that they did have.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That they're content and they are happy with the lives they did have, and they know the importance of the relationship they had previously leading to that, but they're not lingering on it. And that was kind of my one thing with the epilogue that was weird, was that despite that it's a beautiful sequence and a fantastic dance sequence and everything, and it does hit hard, it's so punctuated by that last longing look between the two of them, where it's not a look of desire, it's a look of just realization that this is what life is, and thank you for contributing to it.
Yeah, and I think it's beautiful. I think it's an absolutely beautiful moment in film. You dream, as a writer, director, anything like that, you dream of having a moment like that in your movies that actually means something. You dream of the Green Line bus scene. You know what I'm talking about from Royal Tenenbaums. Like, you dream of that scene. How can you make that have meaning with so little? To me, this is one of the best looks in film. It just nails what this movie was about, which is, and what I like about it too is they're both successful, and yet they're both not seeking each other out. It's not like she's shooting him a text. Oh, I'm so happy to hear that you opened up your club. And he's not saying, oh, I'm so, he walks right past her poster on the wall. It's not like he's saying to himself, oh, I'm so happy that you ultimately went on to become an actress. What this movie, I think, does a pretty good job of is technology is very limited in this movie. And it's definitely a decision made by Chazelle because in reality, everybody in Hollywood texts each other. One of my favorite scenes, not my favorite scenes, but one of the most, the most unrealistic scene of the entire movie is when Emma Stone calls Ryan Gosling and leaves a voicemail. That would never happen in Los Angeles. That would never, ever, ever, ever happen. And people who live in LA will probably say, Phil, you just don't know what you're talking about. You dated the wrong people. No, it'll never happen in Los Angeles. Maybe if you're married and you're waiting for the kids, but everybody just texts each other. They hinge each other. They Bumble each other. They Tinder each other. That's all they do. They don't call each other on the phone. And the ones who do try to call somebody else on the phone, they get called creepy behind their back. Even if they're dating, they don't call each other. So I just thought that was very funny. But I like the decision to not have technology play a large role in this movie because it does make it more human. They could have very easily had, Ryan Gosling and Emma Stone, be texting each other or, oh, I just wanted to see, after the first meetup and everything. No, it just gets right into this relationship. And even when they're talking with other people, it's always face to face, which in reality, that's not how Hollywood works at all, because Hollywood is all assistants and producers and stuff on the phone. They're always on the phone. Yeah. But I love the decision to make all of this face to face because it humanizes this story very, very well. And that's why I think it's so powerful at the end, because we've seen every emotion they've gone through together where, this isn't going to work to this is going to work to I hope you're the one to the defeat to good, we made it. And I like that they stay removed from each other after they make it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the fact that it's just this course of a year of them first interacting with each other and then, getting together. The fact that, like, when they finally meet each other after the party and they're out on the bench and everything, and then Greg phones and you're like, oh, who's Greg?
Mm-hmm.
And, like, it's just that moment of, oh, and they lost connection. Oh, of course they're going to fall in love with each other and stuff. And then to see it fall apart within a year, it's just so realistic of what relationships really are.
Yeah, it's it's that fleeting moment at the beginning where everything seems like this is the one, this is going to be phenomenal, and then it starts to fall. I mean, I like when Emma Stone's talking to her mom on the phone. No, he's going to open his own club, Mom. No, he doesn't have the money yet, but he's going to do it. Like, and it's going to be great. It's going to be great. Like, everything is so idealized that, like, it's not going to be great. That ultimately, likely, this isn't going to work out for someone at least. And but it does a really good job of taking you through those moments. And yeah. And those are the types of things too. Like I like the scene where they're walking around the Warner Brothers lot. Great line in there of, how did you get on here? Seriously, how did he get on that lot? That is a very good question. One that there was no real answer to, and that was definitely a little wink by Chazelle, but that's not an easy lot to get onto. And I like the date though of them walking around the lot and things like that, because those are the things that people in Hollywood do. Like, they go to Griffith Observatory, they go to the iconic type places, and that's where a lot of the memories happen, which also gives it this, Hollywood 1940s golden era type feel, even though in reality it's not necessarily like that. It's just they could envision themselves walking around the same, when she points to the window, that's where Humphrey Bogart and Ingrid Bergman sat in Casablanca. Like, they could have sat in the same place. You know what I mean? It gives a different feel to it than if you're just in some town going to a restaurant or walking around that town.
Yeah. And that's where a lot of, like, the costuming decisions in this movie really play into it as well, where it really does harken back on that golden era of Hollywood. A lot to make you kind of realize that. And it does it with just, like, the mentions of, like, all those jazz artists who are mentioned throughout are all from that era as well. And you have, like, the Rebel Without a Cause aspect of it all and everything. It's all harkening back on this golden era of Hollywood. And that's the costuming as well for a lot of this movie, is them harkening back to that era to make it seem like it's just to show the idealization that people put on these type of things. And the fact that just because we think something one way, just because we dress it up one way, doesn't mean that it is that way.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, Hollywood is all myths. You know what I mean? It's one of those things where you got to live in Hollywood, and then you go to Hollywood and you realize Hollywood's not nice. Like, the town of Hollywood itself is not nice in any way, shape, or form. Like, it's not nice. And people, like, even people in LA admit, no, Hollywood sucks now. Like, Tinseltown is not Tinseltown. It's gross. It's nasty. And that's where I think it was typhoid fever, where Black Plague or whatever the hell it was because there was so much, like, human excrement on the streets that it actually led to, something that was like medieval. Was it the bubonic plague? Like, it was seriously something ridiculous that was there while I was there. And I'm like, yikes. And that was only in Hollywood, but like, yeah. Where's the Hollywood Walk of Fame? Well, it's everywhere. It's all around the city. It's you can't just be, if you're an Uber driver and somebody says, take me to the Hollywood Walk of Fame, you say, I don't know where you want me to take you, because it's everywhere. Like, there is nothing, like, roped off that says, we are in the oasis now. And I think that, that myth carries through this movie a lot. And I love the costuming. It didn't win Best Costume at the Oscars. I forget what ended up defeating it, but it didn't win Best Costumes at the Oscars. And that's really surprising to me, because I think the costuming was subtle enough, but it was so obvious as well of, like, what was going on here with these, it was harkening back to a Singing in the Rain, where everything was so colorful. And I always think about the end scene, the epilogue in this, it's very much harkening back to Singing in the Rain, with that whole scene with Gene Kelly going through whatever Gene Kelly's going through. The only scene in Singing in the Rain that really doesn't make all that much sense, but it's still very good. It just doesn't make that much sense. But it's harkening back to that era, and I'm really surprised it didn't win Best Costuming. I have to look up what beat it. I totally forget. That was a pretty good year for movies, though. If you really think about what else came out that year with Moonlight, Manchester by the Sea, Hacksaw Ridge, it was a pretty solid year for the Oscars.
Yeah, definitely. And that's why everyone was kind of surprised when Moonlight did win Best Picture, despite the fact that they announced La La Land first, right? Because the general public really did like this movie a lot more. A lot of the general public hadn't seen Moonlight, and a lot of the general public had seen La La Land, because it did become this kind of crazed movie that people went and saw. And people were talking about it. And if we're being honest, the only reason I never saw it was because I was living in a place far removed from any movie theaters when it came out. And then I just never got around watching it until this week. And I can see where the craze came from. Even talking to people who I just talk to on a regular basis about La La Land, some people are crazy about it and some people hate it. And it's really interesting that this movie has such a polarizing effect on the audience.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it is just, I don't know. I think that there's something about it that certain people just don't want to like about it. Like there's something almost arrogant about it as well. And I think from the first musical number, like you said, it doesn't even have our main characters. There's something so arrogant about the decisions that Chazelle is making. Now, I respect every freaking decision he made. I think he absolutely deserved to win Best Director over Barry Jenkins. I think Moonlight's a very good movie, but I do think Moonlight's a little bit of an overrated movie. I actually ranked all the Best Picture winners I had seen today on Letterboxd, and I realized I've only not seen 23 of them. And Moonlight was kind of smack in the middle, which is interesting because I realized I also like a lot more Best Picture winners than I realized. I think that La La Land is the better movie. I just think that in the new ranking, Moonlight probably finished second, third, or fourth way more often than La La Land did. La La Land was either 1 or it was 10. Like, I really do believe that that's how it went for that movie that year. And I don't know what it is that ultimately did it, but I'll never forget the one guy I was working with at the time. He would say La La Land was the biggest piece of shit he'd ever seen in his entire life. Now, granted, he clearly had a bad taste in movies, which a lot of people out in Hollywood do have a bad taste in movies because it's not a big piece of shit, even if you don't like it. Like, there's still so much cinematic quality to this movie. But there was just something that irked people. I mean, remember, we had the hashtag of Not My LA or whatever going around when this movie came out. And I don't think this movie does a bad job of representation, considering the story is about Ryan Gosling and Emma Stone. Most of the supporting cast is a minority cast. And so, like, I just remember when Not My LA was trending or Not My Hollywood was trending, there was just a lot of, like, anger towards this movie. And I don't really understand why, but once you kind of got through that, most people really, really, really enjoyed this movie. And for a musical, that wasn't really happening. Because remember, with Les Mis, I know it's one of your favorites, and I think it's phenomenal. That movie wasn't that well received when it came out. It was mostly negative. La La Land had a lot more positive with it, and the negative people, it was the vocal minority in that situation, it seemed like, but they were vocal when they could be. And a lot of people were very happy that Moonlight ultimately did end up beating La La Land, even though, in my opinion, I really don't think either movie is I don't think Moonlight's close to La La Land, in my opinion. I think La La Land is a much better movie, and I think it's the more defining movie of that year, even though Moonlight was a very good movie.
Yeah, maybe part of the dissension from it also comes from a polarizing effects of jazz on people as well. And the fact that it is a very jazzy musical, because, I mean, jazz plays an incredible part in this musical. And I think we're starting to see a point where people are really starting to appreciate jazz again. We've had a couple of very successful movies reference jazz in the last decade, with Whiplash, this movie, Soul most recently, of course. And so jazz seems to be kind of on this uptick again, but there are still those people who are so vehemently opposed to jazz. And I think that's also polarizing. So even if it's not the movie people who are watching this and are enjoying it for the cinematic aspects of it, because in the end, this is an incredible film. Like I said, I did enjoy it quite a bit. I just thought the music, like the musical part of it, not the music, I love jazz, took away from it for me. But I could definitely see that if people weren't looking at the movie that way, or even if they were looking at it that way, and they're like, jazz. Yeah, we're not going to look high on a jazz musician because no one ever looks high on a jazz musician.
Yeah. I hear you. And I think another thing that annoyed people too is that Ryan Gosling and Emma Stone aren't musicians. And we talked about this like when I discussed Black Swan and stuff. Emma Stone and Ryan Gosling do a fine job of singing in this movie. They do a fine job of dancing in this movie. Sorry that they didn't go with other people, but at the end of the day, every decision Hollywood makes is to make more money. Every single decision they make is to make money. Don't let them tell you it's otherwise. It's always to make money. The only time it wasn't to make money was when Wind River pretty much forewent whatever its release when the stuff about Harvey Weinstein came out and it totally screwed its own release. Phenomenal movie. If you haven't seen Wind River, check it out. But that was really the only time a decision was made from not a monetary perspective. Everything else is always money. And yes, you're going to take Ryan Gosling and you're going to take Emma Stone over, unfortunately, very talented Broadway actors who nobody's heard of. Yes, you want them to become heard of, but at that point, we didn't have anybody as massive as Ryan Gosling and Emma Stone, and people were going to pick them. And Emma Stone wins the Oscar. Ryan Gosling loses to a phenomenal Casey Affleck for Manchester by the Sea. If it wasn't for Casey Affleck, Ryan Gosling probably wins the Oscar this year. So you can't really complain too much with the performances from this movie, but I do think people wanted it, you know?
I also, movie musicals are so hard to judge characters by, or an actors by, because what is the character going for? I don't think you wanted fantastic voices for these two characters in this movie for the musical aspect of it, because I do think that it makes them seem more real. The fact that they're singing, and they are fine. They can clearly sing, but they're not the most fantastic voices you've ever heard. I think that's good. I think that leads into these characters a lot more.
Yeah, and Jordan Alford says it here. Well, actually, Damien didn't want experts. He wanted the feeling of normal people breaking out into song. And I think, again, that kind of goes back to what this story is. This story ultimately is about normal people who are in LA, in Hollywood, and they're trying to achieve that dream. Most normal people don't achieve it. And when they do achieve it, they still have to give something up. And that's what this movie ultimately is about. I love the full circle of Emma Stone. She's working at the Warner Brothers coffee shop, and on the way back, now it's somebody else working at the Warner Brothers coffee shop while she comes walking in. I think it's a brilliant full circle because most people who they have gone through that kind of thing, unless they're born as like Will Smith's son or something like that. You know what I mean? Like most people have gone through that sort of thing. But yeah, ultimately, this was a very good year for movies, though. Like I said, if you haven't checked out these Best Picture nominees, I'm just going to read them off real quick because Moonlight and La La Land got all of the attention because La La Land won and then Moonlight defeated it. But the other ones from that year, Arrival, Fences, Hacksaw Ridge, Hell or High Water, Hidden Figures, Lion, and Manchester by the Sea. It's a really good year. If you haven't seen those movies, check them out. I wasn't the biggest Hidden Figures fan because there's too much of Kevin Costner watching people run on the board and going, correct. I'm like, okay, he doesn't know what's going on and neither do I. But otherwise, very, very, very good year for movies. And, it just, I think La La Land is very underappreciated right now. Or not even underappreciated. I just feel like at the time, people didn't appreciate what it was trying to accomplish. And I totally understand where your criticisms of the movie come from. I just think that, it deserves a little bit more leeway. And, you can like both Moonlight and La La Land. Like Jordan Alford said, those were his two favorite movies of 2016. That's okay. I feel like at the time, a lot of people wanted to like defensive and say La La Land sucked because Moonlight was better. And I'm like, I don't know, like just two very different feelings. If I'm trying to be entertained, I'm probably not throwing Moonlight on. And if I'm trying to be sad, although my fiance might disagree with me, probably not throwing La La Land on. I'm probably throwing Moonlight on. So, that's just the difference there. And my favorite movie that year was 20th Century Women, and that didn't even get nominated for Best Picture. So we'll talk about that one in a couple weeks. All right, John, we're going to move on from La La Land. Before we get into it, it's our 15th episode. So, John, we're going to try to change this up a little bit. We're going to do this quickly in between now when we go from one movie to the next. It's like a transition, so you all have something to look forward to as you're going here. But we've been trying to get you all to follow us on Letterboxd. We've been trying to get it. Jay Millsip, Pwood 43. Like I said, I just put out my ranking of my best picture winners ranked, all from personal preference. I don't give a crap about technicalities and stuff. It's what I enjoy. That's why Shakespeare in Love is number 9, and Gone with the Wind right now is 70 of the 71 that I've seen. I think it's 70. It might be 69. But either way, but we figured it might be nice so that you guys all know what we've been watching. And if you like our taste, I mean, at this point, you're 15 episodes in. If you don't like our taste, what the hell are you doing? But we figured, what's the best movie you watched this week other than the ones that we are discussing right now? And John, I'll let you go first because I've talked everybody's ear off, but you had a busy week. What was the best movie you saw this week?
Ooh, it's a tough one. I watched some really pretty good ones. I watched a couple from your list that are way further up for the first time. So I saw Boogie Nights and Once Upon a Time in the West this week. I also watched The Killing of a Sacred Deer this week, which was really good. But I am going to have to go with Once Upon a Time in the West. It was much, and obviously we're going to go in depth on it in like a year and a half from now.
Yeah.
But I was never really into Westerns that much. So like sitting down and just watching the Sergio Leone movie, I was completely engrossed in this movie for its entire run, just from the opening scene all the way till its very conclusion. Just so focused in on it because it was so incredible. It's painted in such a beautiful way. You feel this Western community. You feel everything. It's one of those films that I was kind of like avoiding watching because it was on your list and I didn't really want to watch it for a while, but it kind of came up on like as a suggested watch. And it's a longer movie, so I was a little wary of it, but it was worth every single minute of it because you're just sucked in the entire time.
Well, good. Let's not talk too much about it because it's coming up, as John said, in like a year and a half. There's your tease to stick with us. I'm going to go a different route. So the best movie I watched this week, not out of the two, is actually one we're going to be talking about heavily in this next section because it has the same exact name as the one John has here. But I watched another one called Man Bites Dog right after we got done with our podcast last week. And I have to say, I will not recommend this movie to anybody. It is one of the most graphically violent, most graphically sexual. I mean, there is so much disgustingness in this movie. But if you're not familiar with what it is, it's a mockumentary about a murderer. It's made in 1992 by a Hungarian filmmaker, and the entire movie is just about this desensitization of like humanity, and it is the darkest comedy I have ever seen in my entire life. And there are certain points where you're going to find yourself laughing. You're going to be disgusted with yourself. And then there's going to be other points you're going to be so disgusted with the characters you want to turn the movie off. It is a long hour and a half. But it is so well done. I gave it 4 stars. I would never put it in my top 100 because that would mean that I'm admitting I would want to watch it over and over again. If you've never seen it, if you have a good stomach, sit down and watch it. What a great social satire, but also what a disturbing movie. It's rated NC-17, and it is much more deserved than the shame NC-17 in my estimation. But anyway, the best movie I actually watched this week is a little Swedish movie called The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, but that's not what we're talking about. Although, John, we are going to have a lot of discussion because I am a big fan of that. I'm a big fan of the novel that this was based on, but I also do really enjoy Fincher's, and obviously you really love Fincher's because it's your number 86. Why do you have it at number 86?
There are a few aspects of it that really strike out to me. I do think that Fincher's take of it. Now, I should preface everything. I've never read the books. I've never seen the Swedish version of the film. Okay. So I don't know this adaptation from the source material at all. But what really, really drives me in with this, I was floored when Atticus Ross and Trent Reznor were not nominated for Best Score for this film because the score for this movie is absolutely incredible. And it's the score following up Social Network, which they did win Best Score for. And this was a movie that was less seen. There were some aspects of this movie that very much turned off a lot of people. So I get it. time, this score, absolutely incredible. It really compels it for me. I love the way Fincher shoots the film. I love the way that he incorporates these different horror tropes into this mystery to really make you feel like you don't know where it's going and that everyone's always in danger the entire time. Mm-hmm. And it's those little things. It's where Fincher does best. We both have a different Fincher movie much higher in our list. Mm-hmm. Two of them, but one of them in particular, his like Seven is one of his best movies, and it's the dark grittiness of Fincher. We don't quite get there with Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, but it feels so like spiritually successor to that film. Mm-hmm. That it does show what Fincher knows what he's doing and how to best do it.
Yeah, so The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, this version is gorgeous. Like, it's gorgeous. Mm-hmm. It is so beautiful. The lighting, everything. And that's something I didn't talk about for La La Land, but the lighting in La La Land, I just want to throw that in real quick. Holy shit. But the lighting in The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo is phenomenal. And he does set it up like a horror. The problem is, and I've said this a lot about Fincher as I've gotten older, as Fincher starts to get a studio behind him, which obviously we know the Alien 3 debacle, but when it starts to become too pretty, that's not when Fincher's at his best. And I actually think one of the things that I like more about the Swedish version than this version is the Swedish version doesn't look nice. Like it looks gritty. It looks grainy. It looks like, it looks like it's shot on film. This looks like it's so, like everything is so pristine. I don't know if this is the type of movie that needed to be pristine. I still appreciate it a lot. There's no doubt about it. But I do think that sometimes I like the Seven style a little bit more. And sometimes I like that Fight Club style a little bit more, where it really feels like you're down in the dirt with these people. Not like, yes, look how pretty the snow looks when it's falling. It's like, no, I want to see like how disgusting that apartment looks when they go into the glutton's house. Like, let's go. Let's do it right now. But I do agree with you. I mean, Fincher still had enough of a hand in this movie to make some very gratuitous scenes, which we will talk about, because I think this one goes a little too gratuitous and it was unnecessary at times, especially for a Hollywood movie. Now, remember, Blue Valentine received an NC-17 at the time, and it was reduced to an R. This just came out as an R. You watch those two movies, they came out a year and a half apart. That's a big middle finger to the MPAA, because that's pretty despicable, if you ask me. But anyway, John, it's your movie. I don't want to get ahead of myself here.
Oh, it's okay. So the film starts off with this roaring cover of the Immigrant Song for the opening credits with like Trent Reznor, Nine Inch Nails, and Karen O from the Yayas. And it just feels so, I don't even know how to say it. It almost feels like chaotic in a sense, to kind of capture this feeling going into this movie of like, what is this movie? It's titled The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. We don't even meet Lisbeth for quite a while into this film. Mm-hmm. And we don't understand her relevance to the film for quite a while either. And that's kind of where this movie goes. It starts with that Immigrant Song opening into Daniel Craig's character's disgrace and everything. And it's just showing you how raw this world is, despite how pristine it looks, like you said, Phil. And those are type of contrasts are what intrigue me in film. Because this score, which I'm going to keep referencing to, is very raw. It's raw. It's emotional. It feels in a way like it's all around you, but it's kind of crushing you at the same time. And most of the time we're in very open spaces in this movie. And those type of contrasts are what really draw me to this movie and why I enjoy it so much.
Yeah, I mean, I do agree. I remember when this trailer came out, I was a huge fan. I mean, I like all three of the movies. I got to rewatch them though, because it had been a long time, but I liked all three of the original Swedish ones. I read the books. I thought the books were great. The first one is just, it's top notch, but Stieg Larsson also died before he was even able to release them. And the second two were kind of released in this, scatterbrained kind of AI type way. For anybody who's familiar with how artificial intelligence kind of went down, that's kind of what ended up happening here. It was just kind of done. Mm-hmm. And I remember when they made this trailer and it had the immigrant song, and it was just that big middle finger, like type of trailer with the boom girl, boom with, and it just keeps boom, boom, boom. And it's just like, it's such an aggressive trailer, and it is such an aggressive movie. And I think that where this version falters a bit. And so I watched, so just to give you an idea of how this went down this week for me, I had not seen either of these movies since this version came out in 2011, 2012, whatever it was. I had not seen this I had not seen any of the movies. I hadn't read the books. I hadn't done anything. So I'm a decade removed from all of this. I'm a much different person now. So I said, all right, let me watch the David Fincher one first. And I watched it and I really, really liked it. I was like, oh yeah, okay, yeah, this is what I remember. And then I watched the other one the next day and I said, ooh, this is the one. This is what I liked. Because what it does a good job of is it cuts out a lot of the coincidences. You don't have Daniel Craig's daughter showing up to say, I'm going to Bible school, and oh, there's the thing, and then disappear. Like, it doesn't have that. It's Lisbeth Salander figuring it out. And then as you get into them actually figuring out the murders and stuff, they really take their time with that. It's not rushed to make it quick. There's no dead cat to get the emotion. Like, I think it takes its time a little better. But the one thing that I absolutely think it does better than the American version, and I really don't think that there's any denying it, and this is no knock on Rooney Mara, who I believe should have probably won the Oscar, but Michelle Williams was my favorite that year, but it certainly shouldn't have been Meryl Streep, is the Swedish version gets into Elizabeth Salander's head so much better. So much better. And the movie is stylized to fit her style better. And I feel that Rooney Mara's character, Rooney Mara's version of this was almost a bit of a, it's weird to say because it's such a great performance and it's such a good everything. It almost feels like a caricature of an already over the top character. And the movie doesn't seem to know how to pull her in as much. I'm telling you, this movie, you really only get, why would a girl who's 23 years old lose or still be under a ward of the state or whatever.
Ward of the state.
Because I tried to burn my father alive. In the original one, they show you those scenes. They get into that stuff. And I think it does a much better job of creating that mystery of what is up with this girl, where this one focuses, I think, a bit too much on the British Daniel Craig with the name of Michael Blomkvist, which it is. He is British in this movie, people. And Robin Wright is an American doing a Swedish accent. Those types of things don't turn me off from movies. I just thought it was interesting. Robin Wright is American doing a bad Swedish accent, and Daniel Craig is decidedly British. All of that aside, that's one of my big problems with this version compared to the other one. That being said, when this movie came out, I was like, why is it not nominated for Best Picture? Come on, where the hell is it? Let's go. I want to see the second one. And I was pissed when they didn't make the sequels. I thought that was very unfortunate.
And I think part of that does come down to the fact that, I mean, America isn't really ready for this type of movie. Wasn't really ready for this type of movie in 2011. It's not the type of movie that you build a series around back then. I don't even know if you released it today, if people would want to build a series around this type of movie. I obviously thoroughly enjoy it, but I think you're really right where the mistake they had and the reason why they couldn't really make it a series is because they didn't focus on Lisbeth as a main character. They kind of made her as a side character in this movie.
Yeah, and I'm telling you, you should watch the original. It was on Amazon Prime. I don't know if it's on there in Canada, but you should check it out because it really does make her the name of the book, the name of the series, The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. You know, and I feel like this is the man who played James Bond. Which I still, like I said, I still gave this a 3.5 stars. It's still an incredibly watchable movie. It's just when you start to watch the other one, you realize the coincidences and things like that they really do hammer into this. The Christopher Plummer exposition at the beginning is not there in the other movie. Like, he is figuring this stuff out. I think that's much better. Figuring out, like, one of my favorite things, one of my favorite storyline points is the photographs and how they're taking one photograph. She's looking at somebody. Now let's take that photograph and match it up. it's much better explained how they actually find that woman in the original one than in this one, which seems a bit too easy of like, yeah, we just know her name. It's like, really? You just know that person's name 50 years? Really? I don't even remember people who I was in college with, and that was 5 years ago. So I don't know about that, but yeah, it was. But what was interesting, and this is a fun fact for you, John, and for anybody listening, Rooney Mara, after this movie was over, was so convinced they were going to do sequels. She had gotten, this is R-rated, children. She had gotten her nipples pierced for the movie, but she did not want to keep her nipples pierced. So she was going to remove the piercings so that it would, the hole would close up. But she was so convinced they were going to do a sequel that she kept the nipple piercings in so that she could play the role again without having to get them pierced again. And then once they ended up electing not to, she had them removed. But I'm just saying, like, good on Rooney Mara for going that hard into this freaking role. And there were plans to make sequels. Ultimately, it just never really worked out. And I think some of that had to do with the success of the sequels in Sweden were not very good either, because the sequels are not as good. Even though I enjoy them, they are not as good as this original because the mystery around the family just is not there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I don't even know what the sequels, like the story of the sequels are, because I never indulged in them at all. And it did kind of just, that was one of the aspects that I had questions about, because like, how do you continue this movie? Where do you go from here? The mystery's over. Neil's life seems to be back on track now. Speaking of which, the closing shot for this film is incredible. I absolutely love that, because that's the moment where you do realize Lisbeth is actually your main character.
Yeah.
That exact moment where it's her explaining to her previous handler, I guess.
Yeah.
Or just that, like, she finally made a friend who he would approve of. And then to see her happy, and at this point where she seems to be, like, ready to kind of pull herself together a little bit. And then just to see her take the coat to Mikhail, and he's just there with his ex-wife. And he just throws it in the trash and walks away. And it's like, it's so perfect for Lisbeth's character. And it's an absolute incredible ending to this film.
Yeah, and it does kind of offset the opportunity for sequels, because they're both supposed to be in the next two, and they work together in the next two. This kind of says, no, she's done with him. Well, the problem is with her being done. They do make some decisions in this movie that I just was like, okay, like, I guess, but you're not setting it up for more, because while it's an awesome final shot, it really only works because this is the only movie in the series. If they come back in the sequel and they're buddy again, what is this? You know what I mean? That doesn't work anymore. While it's very good, I mean, it takes them a little long to get to the realization that she really is your main character, especially with the fact that everything that goes on at the beginning of the movie is about Michael Blomkvist losing his life, essentially. And she is a side character. I mean, in the book, Michael Blomkvist is very much your main character, and then she starts to take over in the second half. This movie, I don't feel like she ever really takes over until like maybe the final 20 minutes, which I think go on a little bit too long. Anyway, where they kind of could have just like wrapped that up, not in terms of her following him around and trying to be nice to him, but in terms of her going and getting all the money out of the banks and stuff. Gets a little confusing for my brain, but maybe I'm just not smart enough.
No, it is kind of cute, because it's just a bunch of clips, and it's like it's interjected with all these like different news clips and stuff like that. It was an interesting decision, because the thing is like, does it need to be resolved in this film? That's, I think, the biggest question with it is, does that plot line of, oh my God, this guy's actually involved with like gangsters and stuff, did that have to be resolved in this movie?
Yeah, I mean, and I guess it's like your prologue and epilogue. You know what I mean? Like, this movie very much has a prologue and an epilogue, and I like it. Gives him motivation for why he ultimately goes and does what he does and all that. I just think that the ending here, the epilogue, is a little long. In terms of that. Now, let me ask you this. So you didn't know anything about this coming into it. Obviously, I had more knowledge going into this one, and so I had expectations. Now, I'm one of those people who I hate when people say a book's better than a movie because who the hell cares? They're two different things. They're two different. Okay, but if that book's better than, but is that book better than another book? Because those are things you can compare. You know, I like Gala apples, and I like, you know, Red Delicious apples. Those are things you can compare. Saying I like an apple, but I don't like an orange. Okay, but they don't have anything to do with each other. And so I hate when people say the book is better. I do think that the adaptation in the original is better. But do you think, now in retrospect, being a smart moviegoer the way you are, John, does it hurt that they decided to cast somebody as recognizable as Stellan Skarsgård in this movie? Or did that not even come on your radar? Because everybody else is, other than, you know, Christopher Plummer's obviously main character, but Christopher Plummer, Rooney Mara, Daniel Craig, those are your main characters. Everybody else in the movie is kind of a no-name. And Donald Sumter ends up going on to be in Game of Thrones and all that, and that's what it is. But does having Stellan Skarsgård being somebody make it too obvious? Or was that not something that was even on your radar and you're just like, well, he's the one who just has more time going on here?
Honestly, I thought he was just the Swedish actor that decided to cast in this.
Okay.
But now that you mention it, yeah, maybe that is a bit of too much of a tip of the hat. But at the same time, like, we see people in bit roles like that all the time, right? Where it's like, so is it important? I don't know. Because like, I mean, I'll just throw an example because I mean it's May the 4th, so I watched Rogue One for the first time in years today. And Mads Mikkelsen's in that movie. You think Mads Mikkelsen's in there, you think he's going to be more of a main character than he is in that movie, right? Yeah. So these type of things do happen where they do cast bigger name actors and more recognizable actors in these bit parts of the movie. I think they kind of get with it in this. I don't think you really pull out. I don't think you can really pinpoint how important Stellan Skarsgård's character is until you actually get to the point. Because the way Fincher does lay out this mystery, he does lay it out with just enough information for you to get to the conclusion right before the characters do.
Yeah, because the whole time you're thinking it has something to do with the Nazis. Maybe it's Harold. Maybe it's God. Maybe whatever happened with Gottfried. I love this mystery, and again, like, it's hard for me to talk about this movie just because, like, it's essentially the same thing, and then you have but in terms of how this mystery plays out in both movies and in the books, it is a phenomenal mystery. The writing of this is so well done. I love the idea of, you know, they all just got together on this day and this girl just disappeared and he thinks she was murdered for 40 years. I love the obsession aspect. And I love that they are able to start peeling back layers that makes sense for them to be peeling back. It's not, there's nothing that just falls into their lap. It makes sense that they start to peel back. I think the mystery is absolutely phenomenal. Now, I don't want to spoil too much, but you've already seen the movie, so really these are smaller things. One of the things that the book and the Swedish version do is they make it so that Michael Blomkvist actually spent time on that island as a child and that his babysitter was Harriet. And so there's more of a personal connection for Michael Blomkvist, and there's more of a personal reason why he was asked to come by Wenger, because he's saying, you used to stay here. Do you remember that? And you have those flashes, and they're humanizing. Right. And I think that also keeps you off the trail a little bit better of Martin in that movie. Now, granted, I can never really say, oh, you knew it was Stellan Skarsgård the whole time, because my dad sat there and watched it with me, and he had never read the book. He had never seen the original. He had no friggin' clue it was going to be Stellan Skarsgård. So it's hard for me to really comment on that, but that's why I wanted to ask you, because it is your number 86, and it is a movie that you had no idea what was coming when you sat down to watch it. So I really was genuinely curious if you felt that it was too much of a tip of the hat, or if maybe Stellan Skarsgård just isn't as recognizable as I think he is, because ultimately I love Good Will Hunting and I love a lot of stuff with Stellan Skarsgård that most moviegoers probably aren't even going to connect that he's in those.
Yeah, I didn't really notice it the first time. I didn't even think about it this time when I watched it. Now I'm going to just pay more attention to that when I watch movies from now on. But no, I don't think so. And like I said, or like I was saying, Fincher did lay out the mystery really well, so you didn't really get the tip of the hat too early at all. And actually, one of the things I really appreciate about this is he made research scenes not boring.
Yeah. Well, won Best Film Editing at the Oscars.
Scenes,
it was the only Oscar it won was film editing, and it definitely earned that with how it edits those scenes.
Yeah, because research scenes can be terribly boring. Like I'm even just thinking about, like, especially in the digital age where research is all just done on a computer and stuff. You think about like the X-Files revival when they're just like Googling things. It's boring. You don't care about that. There's no fun in that investigation. Whereas the research scenes that we got in this film are really fun because you're kind of like following along with the piecing together of everything throughout all of them.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. That was something I definitely wanted to talk about that I just totally forgot. But yeah, the film editing is really good. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that the Fincher had done movies like Seven and Zodiac and these movies where it has to move like that. There has to be those cuts. There has to be that way of getting through tedious material without being tedious. And if you think about it, and we'll talk about Seven when we get to yours, because I have it in 2 weeks, but we won't be talking about it then. But, you know, a lot of the research scenes in Seven are absolutely despicable. And I think that he does a good job of that in here of keeping you interested in what it is that they're searching. And I love the way they use the Mac of her head just slowly moving. And it's just the picture montage of her like coming to that realization. And I think it's just all done. It's all done very, very well. There's no denying that is all done very, very well. Really just, I think, comes down to what your preference is in terms of, do you like this one more? You like the other one more? And I mean, I can see why people like either one. I do want to say though, and this movie didn't come with a warning last week because I honestly forgot how brutal it was. But between the rape scene and the revenge scene, I think he might have had a little too much fun. I think there might have been a little too much fun in this movie of, I'm going to make this as realistic and all of that as possible. They were brutal. And I'm not one to really like turn away and such in movies. Brutal. It's absolutely brutal. And they're still brutal in the Swedish version. There's no doubt about it. But what I think the Swedish version does is the revenge is a little bit more brutal than the actual rape scene. This one, the rape scene is it's like unwatchable. It's hard. And so, you know, you have to know that something bad is going to happen to that guy. And my fiance actually said, I'm done watching this unless something bad happens to him. And I was like, don't worry, he's going to get his. And like, I don't know. I just feel like there might have been a little bit too much going on in that scene there that just ultimately wasn't necessary. And I wonder if that was made in 2021, you know, would they have trimmed that as much as possible to still get their point across without having to make it, I don't know. Anybody who's ever seen the movie Irreversible, that's probably the most ridiculous rape scene in movie history. But this one's right there.
Yeah, I mean, I had honestly also forgotten how gratuitous this rape scene was. I watched it and I was like, oh my God, we didn't give a warning about this. But yeah, so sorry guys if you watch this and were a little off put by that. Definitely forgot how bad it was.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
And it is at that point where, and that's one of those things that you do have to question in films sometimes. It's like, how far is too far? Right? How far is making something seem so realistic that it's just unacceptable to put on film?
Yeah, and I don't think you ever hit a point where it's unacceptable. I think that is, I mean, obviously, as long as it's not real, you know, I think that's an important thing here. I think as long as it's not real, I think that it's ultimately people's choices of what they want to watch or not. The reason why movies with these excessive rape scenes and things like that, they normally don't do well at box office. Now, The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo is going to do well no matter what they put in it. They could have had a leprechaun doing a jig halfway through the movie, and people would have been like, "That was the greatest scene I've ever seen." This movie was going to do amazing, no matter what was going to happen. But I think a lot of movies, they don't take the chance with this. They'd leave it at the blowjob and they'd move on. You know what I mean? And I think that there's a lot in this movie that you can't necessarily get away with. Irreversible, for anybody who doesn't know, is a Gaspar Noé movie. Made back in 2002. It was in Cannes. I think it might have won Cannes or something. It's brutal. I mean, the poster for the movie is literally the rape scene from the movie. What in the world? That movie didn't make money. You know what I mean? It was trying to be that shock value and stuff. And I don't think the Girl with the Dragon Tattoo is meant to be shock value. I don't think there's a thing is too far. You know what I'm saying? Like, I do think, obviously there's things that I'm going to say, I'm not going to watch that. I have no interest in seeing that. But at the end of the day, ultimately, I think like it's your decision. And if they're going to make it, they're going to make it. If they're not, they're going to not. Anybody who's ever seen Roger Ebert's review for a Serbian film, which, John, are you familiar with a Serbian film?
I'm familiar with it, yes.
Yes. So anybody who's seen his review of a Serbian film, he says, I will never give this movie stars because for me to give it the stars that are appropriate would mean I'm recommending it to you. And I would never, ever recommend this movie to a human being because it's disgusting. I think you have to make those choices. When you have David Fincher and Rooney Mara and James Bond and all these big people, you didn't need it, in my opinion. I don't think you needed it to be quite so explicit. And I think the point still gets across without it being quite so explicit. And I think, seriously, John, I'm telling you, go sit down and watch the Swedish one. I think you would agree with me if you saw just the way they handle it there. I think it's handled a little bit better.
I almost wonder if Fincher wanted to put the emphasis so much on the revenge scene because it was kind of our big character definement for Smith in this film, where it really like shows kind of like how unhinged she can be at times. He needed to justify it somehow.
Yeah.
Which is why felt like he pushes the boundaries with this rape scene.
Yeah, and I do think that you definitely want what happens to her to be worse than what happens to this guy until it's not worse than what happens to this guy. But because it was so bad what happened to her, like the revenge can be a notch above it. You know what I mean? Like the revenge can be higher up. I don't know. It's long. It's a long scene. And, I'm just surprised. I mean, really what it comes down to is I'm just flat out surprised. But again, a lot of really good in this movie. Like, I know that it's tough because I'm so in love with the other one. Like I gave the other one 4.5. It might end up in my top 100 at the end of the day. I don't know where, but I hadn't seen it in so long. I kind of forgot how much I loved it and how much I loved that mystery. It's always weird with Hollywood remakes of foreign movies. They always do the Hollywood thing to it. You know what I mean? There's always that Hollywood thing that is done that just isn't done. There's little moments. Lisbeth Salander doesn't meet her mother in this one. Instead, she goes and talks to the other guy. Why are we cutting out her mother? Her mother is a very integral part of this story that we just don't get, that we get in the other thing. Anita Wenger is not nearly as much of a character. Or is a much different character in the actual story. Harriet Wenger, you don't actually see so the fact that Anita and Harriet are the same person in the books, he never meets Anita Wenger. At least that's not the way that it happened. Like he doesn't go to London to meet Anita. And I think that some of those things, I think that they take away a little bit because it's like, why didn't Harriet, I know Harriet wouldn't want to say something, but part of me was like, all right, come on. Like, you know that he's searching for this. Like, why don't you just tell him what happened with Martin and have him go back and kill Martin? I don't understand. There's little things like that in this one that just kind of irk me more. Where they go into hiding, not as deeply into hiding as she does in the, in the other one, she's in Australia. She is nowhere to be found. Just little things like that. But Hollywood remakes are always going to try to do their own thing. You can't be a shot for shot remake. It's not worth it. And, sometimes it's really great decisions and sometimes it doesn't work as well, but this is a great movie. I mean, there's no doubt about it that The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, the 2011 version, is definitely a great movie. John likes it more than I do, and that's fine. That's why it's on his list. That's why it's not on mine.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I think a lot of this with American remakes, a lot of the time, people in other countries and not in North America prefer different storytelling techniques than Americans prefer. And that's very frequently why, if you're sitting down to watch a foreign movie with someone, and if they can get over the fact that it's in a different language and they have to actually read subtitles, they'll be like, you'll sit there and you're like, oh my God, that movie was incredible. And they'll be like, that movie sucked. Speaking with someone the other day who told me that Another Round was a terrible movie.
You should stop speaking with that person.
Yeah. And a lot comes down to the fact that storytelling is appreciated differently in different parts of the world. And Americans like closed stories. Like, North Americans like closed stories that are complete and are neatly tied up with a bow at the end. And that's kind of plays into this idea that, like, yeah, there were a few too many coincidences in this movie. There were a few too many conveniences that allowed for the mystery to be solved, that Mikhail could just go and be like, hey, Harriet, come on home, please, now.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think that has to do with, like, an American audience reception to things as opposed to a European audience reception to things.
Yeah, and as you'll end up seeing on these lists as we move forward and getting into next week, we do have a lot more foreign or international film, whatever you want to call it. It is a preference. I mean, it's something like I watched a movie called Underwater the other night, last night, which is 2020 Kristen Stewart movie. There's no act one. I'm like, okay, I get that, like, American films sometimes rush through act one, but, like, to have no act one in general, like, now we've gone too far. I like that European style, or, whatever it is of a 45-minute act one, an hour-long act one. That's fine with me. I'd prefer that because I think it builds up. And The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, the Hollywood remake, does a very good job of still taking its time before getting into, like, this is a hour-long act one. And I do give them a lot of credit for making that decision, because that is not an easy decision to make.
No, especially especially in a world where in 2011 we were at a point of gratification for a lot of things too. Mm-hmm. So to make the audience sit there and stew, I think it just enhances this movie so much more.
Yep, absolutely, absolutely. All right, John. Well, shall we move on to what we're doing next week?
Absolutely.
All right, everybody. So we are going to be moving on to number 85. We're going to be talking about John's number 85, 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri. My number 85, The Hunt from 2012. It's the Thomas Vinterberg movie, which, if you're not familiar with Thomas Vinterberg, another round, he just won Best Foreign Film and was nominated for Best Director for that movie. So make sure to check out those two movies before next week. That should be an interesting one. Two very heavy movies. Heavy in different ways than The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, though, that's for sure. Very strong reflections, I believe, on the state of society. And one of them was a Danish movie, and one of them is an American movie about the American Midwest. So very much looking forward to those. 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri is a phenomenal movie. I cannot wait to talk about it again. And if you have not seen The Hunt, do yourself a favor and watch it. It feels more relevant today than it did back in 2012. So those would be the two movies we're watching next week. John and I told you that, our favorite movies we watched so far this week: Once Upon a Time in the West for him, Man Bites Dog for me, after I just talked about how awful the rape scene is, The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. Man Bites Dog also has one of the most egregious ones of all time. Just saying that right now. But I didn't want to say The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo is my favorite one I watched this week, because I wanted to mix it up a little bit. But all that being said, tonight was a very fun podcast as well. Hope you all enjoyed the discussion. Jay Millsip, Pwood43. If you go over on the Letterboxd and follow along with us, I've seen 71 out of 94 Best Picture winners, and I'm including Sunrise. That's pretty good, guys. So I just made that list. I'm going to try to get through the rest of them. Go check mine out there, and check out what John and I are watching all week long. Otherwise, thank you all for listening. Tune in next week, and that's it. I'll see you all